I'm going to introduce Alexander Shea, Head of Publishing at Voodoo, who will be in the room. Here he is. Hello, Alexander. Can you hear me?
Hi, Stuart. I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome.
You're looking and sounding fantastic.
Okay, great. It's the first.
Good. Well, we're all with you. We're all supporting you. You're going to tell us about how Voodoo hit 5 billion downloads. So I think we're ready to rock. I'm going to disappear and then I'll come back in 20 minutes with a Q&A. Good luck.
Perfect. Thanks, Stuart. So yeah, just to start things off, let me maybe share screen because I've got just a couple of slides I wanted to go through with you guys as a first way of introducing maybe Voodoo a little bit, our success to date, some of the things that we've been seeing lately. And also, I really want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for some questions at the end, because I think that I can't actually see your questions until then, which is fine, but I should be actually fairly quick. I'm hoping to get through this in 15, 20 minutes, maybe tops, so that we have plenty of questions. So please feel free to share them as you go along. I find that it's usually a really good way of sharing knowledge. It makes it less boring for you guys as well. So in any event, the title of this presentation is The Science of Publishing. And I don't want to overpromise here. There is no magic formula. There is no guarantees that you can give in gaming, and hyper-casual reflects that. Although what we found at Voodoo is that hyper-casual is a much more certain industrialized process than most other segments of gaming, meaning that it is more like a science than many other areas within gaming where chance will be a big factor. And we'll go into that and why we feel that that our role as a publisher is really to reduce the chance factor and make big hits something that you can aspire to in a realistic way if you're putting all the ingredients for them on your side as well. So going into the topics today, as I said, we'd love to go into a little bit more about who we are as a publisher, so how we work with studios and some of our historical performance. What we see as being new emerging trends in 2021, and it's been a volatile year with everything going on from IDFA to COVID and so forth, and it has had an impact, we feel, on the types of games that make it. And the last part was about how we feel we can stay as a publisher on top of the list when it comes to studios and what they're looking for. So jumping right in, as Stuart just mentioned, we've been fortunate enough in the last 3 years and performing enough to be on top, to have downloaded, to have our games downloaded over 5 billion times in the world, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. And if you just look at the top publishers, I think we took this fairly recently over the month of June mostly. We were also very much on top of the downloads list and worldwide free downloads for iPhone, and I think Android is broadly reflective of that as well. And this is really not to brag, because as a publisher, our DNA is not downloads based. We're not looking for visibility. We're not looking for downloads, frankly. It's a nice thing to have because it demonstrates that you're really gaining traction and that your users are quite satisfied with the games you're shipping. But what we do look for much more is to ensure that at the end of the day, our studios are making more than commercial viability, that they are finding great success. Maybe not every month, certainly, but in a frequent enough way down the line once they've ramped up, so that this doesn't only make sense as a segment of gaming for them to be active in as fantastic developers and studios, but that it actually is a very lucrative business for them. Because unless we can find more than sustainability for them, we have no reason of being. And so downloads is not the way for them to achieve profitability. It all comes down to, for every download that you're generating through your great games, what is, how many cents are you making off of that? What is the payout? Because when you failed 10 times in a row and you've hit a massive success, we want to make sure that success is really more than paying off for that single game and for all the failures that came before it. And there are failures that are necessary to find success. So, big summary is that, yes, we've done a lot of downloads. We're very proud of that. And we're very proud of the studios, the partner studios that we've done this with. And I'll get into that in a second. But actually, we're even more proud of the success that we've brought to them financially, because that ultimately means that many of them have been able to grow, first to sustain, survive, while testing their prototypes and getting coaching from all of our publishing managers. And then in a second place, to grow their studio once they hit success, bring in more talent, maximize the chances, and achieve repeatability in their success. So this is a quick overview of what we do and what many publishers and studios do right now. So there's nothing new here. I just wanted to give you a bit of a background, because we've applied this from day one, really from 2017, end of 2017 onwards. We developed the first Publidash, which has changed tremendously since then, where we encourage studios to test all of their first builds for obviously marketability and engagement. But what we've added to this probably is acting earlier in the funnel by really being a part of the studios we coach. And to do that, what you need is weekly calls. You need ideation sessions with your studios. You need to define what an ideation mindset is about and approach. What are the products that work well fundamentally, and what are the products that work well this given month or week? And then you need to shortlist with the studio and the publishing manager. We found that you need to shortlist together the list of games broadly in the universe of ideas that you've had as a studio, maybe with your publishing manager or not. You need to shortlist them to make sure that the most valuable projects and only those are retained, in order to see, okay, what are we moving into production? What are we going to work on? And then obviously when the KPIs come through, that's when I guess the science part of it takes over, and we test a lot of prototypes. So we have a high visibility on the market, and that gives us a much more fine-tuned approach to what are the KPIs that work, what are the KPIs that don't work. And so we're able to go from testing to prep, as you see here, in a very certain way. So we make sure that obviously there are no false negatives, that we're not killing any prototypes that might have made it. That's a priority. But we also make sure that the projects that won't make it, based on the data we have and based on thousands of data points that we've built through time, that those studios are able to go back to the ideation phase rather than go down this funnel, which is a dead end for many games. So we want to make sure that the funnel isn't a dead end, and that no prototype that does have potential gets retained and goes through the phases. With that said, we do have an edge also in our launch process. We've also fine-tuned this tremendously, and we've built many teams, even in the last 6 to 12 months, around the launch process. We have a launch ops team. We have a game ops team. We obviously have UA monetization creatives team, market devs. We've got CPI squads, and all of these different teams kind of fit right into the initial communication channel with the studios that a publishing manager holds and can centralize in many ways, and the studio. So we try to make sure that any complexity or large amount of resources that are warranted on our side never interfere with this kind of one-on-one, super lean, super fast approach to communicating with our studios. And with that said, I'm just going to pause for a second, because I see there's already a bunch of interesting questions. So I think I'll start taking a few as we go along. So, one question is, how do we advise developers to make the most of the successes without being stuck on the same game rerun forever? Now, I'm not sure what you mean. I'll take that at the end, actually, because I'm not sure what we mean by game rerun on that one. Another question that just rose from what I just said, so I'll take it now, which was, what is a false negative that you mentioned? Well, typically a false negative is going to be a game where you think that it's indicating negative marketability and engagement metrics. So maybe your CPI is a bit higher than you thought it might be in order to achieve success. And maybe your day one retention is a little low. But there are other things you can spot, and that we're much more agile at spotting and careful, like maybe the playtime is a little bit higher than you would expect, and therefore that balances out with a tougher marketability metrics. Or maybe your CTR is actually quite high, and there's something weird going with the CPI, whereby maybe it's the App Store optimization that failed, maybe the wrong choice of names. Or another false negative that we try to avoid is, well, maybe your game actually has a lot of potential in terms of virality on TikTok. So we cover that base as well. And we do that without ever interfering with this methodical, systematic approach that says, well, at the beginning, we're not going to overinvest the studio's time on a project unless it indicates one KPI of potential in it. And when we start looking at the KPIs, it's very hard to describe because it's case by case. So we built out big teams to address the case by case to make sure that every different case deserves the attention it warrants. And as soon as we spot potential success, that's when we step in and we focus on this so that we can lift the lagging metrics. Anyways, I'll come back to this at the end if there are additional questions on the false negatives, because it's a good question. To summarize some of the things that this process, that this approach, this mindset, this relationship with the publishing team and the experience that we've built, frankly, with a fantastic team. It's a lean team. We're just 12, which is quite small, actually, if you look at the number of successes. But it also means that every publishing manager you work with, they've all launched big hits that are very profitable. And that's important because it means that the studios that they've coached that have made those hits have been compensated duly. And a short list, it's a very small short list of these studios. There are many more than in this list, but I did want to mention these because, I mean, we've omitted some studios here that have had multiple success, but we wanted to make it fit on a single slide. So we had to pick. But what you can tell from this slide is we've been able to find repeat success. And these are not launches. These icons are games that have made a tremendous downloads numbers, but also financial success for the studio. They've been very, very profitable games. And what you can tell, and so you have to multiply it to look at the list of launches and games that were otherwise profitable if you want to see what repeat success in that sense looks like. But this is a slide we find quite representative of our ability to get studios to succeed and succeed again. And oftentimes what you find is that once a studio launches its first game, like Pokeball with Lawson, or Bounce Forever with Cassette, or a Castle Rec with Orbital Knight, a Splashy with App Advisory, this is back in 2018, or even Fire Rise with H8, which is a much smaller game than Helix Jump, which I think everyone knows is the second logo there, which is a massive, massive game, our biggest game ever. And then when you got Montpellier, which is an internal team, but still a fantastic team. You'll notice three very familiar logos, which are Paper 1, 2, 3, which are all each in their own right amazing games, and it's not easy to build sequels in hyper casual. We happen to know a little bit about that, but they've also built Whole.io and Crowd City, and those were in their own right fantastic games as well. Finally, you have OHM, and they've in the last 14, 15 months, they've done basically 4 big hits with one big one off the starting block these days. So what I'm trying to say in this slide is that, yes, it's an art, because every conversation about an idea starts with opinions, gut feeling, hunch, and all of these things are based on experience. Otherwise, there's no way you can make it in this sector. But they also start from a hunch and a feeling of newness, and you can't learn that from past success. You really can't, and you can't learn it from a recipe. But in terms of mindset, approach, discipline, rigor, and really a set of guidelines that hold true or need to evolve, depending on the ones you look at. In that sense, we are able to build machines. And we want to do that not just for ourselves, but we really want to do it with our best studios, with all of our studios, because it turns out that they respect it and stay with us for it. So moving on, we do see a large portion of the market before it hits the stores, and that's something that we take seriously, because it means that some of the learnings that we see on some prototypes, they may or may not work on those prototypes and make it through the whole funnel, or they're learnings we can take and bring to other prototypes from the same studio or from other studios if they're comfortable with it, and apply very early insights on what works. An example of that last year was the end of level random reward, but skill-based end of level systems that we applied first to games like Bike Sale, Pokeball, and then gradually we deployed on all of the big games that you saw last year. Very soon the market replicated this, but the lag of time between when you've heard it from Voodoo as a Voodoo studio and when the market has heard it is actually can be a 6-month period. And within that time, oftentimes some features and some features and some visuals can change significantly. So the market has already changed, but we've been able to capture the opportunity early on. That's quite important. Now, moving on, maybe to leave 10 minutes for questions, which I promised to do. I think one of the things that we've seen in 2021 that really makes it different from 2020, from our perspective, from where we're looking at, is that 2021 is a different ballgame in terms of CPIs, as everyone has seen in the market. But also in terms of LTVs. And so what we found is that the games that are functioning the best in this market, especially in the second quarter, are games that have very high engagement metrics. Obviously, easier said than done, but not necessarily harder in our view than looking for very low CPIs, which was something that we did last year. Last year, maybe 15 out of the 20 massive hits that we published were all focused on, low CPI. They all, 80% of them had really low CPIs, around 10 cents or so in testing. And what we see this year is very different. What we see is that games that have succeeded quite well this year have been high playtime games. What you can see is a list of playtimes and day 1, day 7 retentions and launch CPIs. Nothing secret there. These are all testing metrics. They change a lot when you launch. They evolve. So all of this data is obsolete. But the truth is we've seen high engagement games overperform in 2021, probably due to the market dynamics. And that's a good thing. We feel that means that there is a way to publish very big games. I think it's a question that was asked previously. What do you do in this market environment? Well, you build deep games that are high engagement games. You kind of ignore this crazy CPI curve and hope that the product that you're building fundamentally is strong, and that tends to get you there. Obviously, you need a big machine behind you for those assumptions to work. You need a big marketing team, creative teams, market devs, huge ideation sessions with your publishing manager, with the creative teams here. We set that all up before we even launch games, and the key is that if you can do your part as a studio in these high retention, high engagement games, we will do our part as a publisher. We'll make sure that we'll get those to count towards those 5 billion downloads to date and counting. So the last point very quickly, an additional maybe selling point, I guess, that we've built out this year, we didn't really have last year, was we've been quite active in extending the reach of your games beyond the App Store. So we've had partnerships with Snap, Amazon Prime, WeChat. We're working on some other really interesting partnerships in social and so forth. And that just means that your games don't only generate financial interest for you guys as studios within the stores, but also beyond. And so, the user base in hyper casual is healthy and growing, and we want to bring it to a further step of going beyond the stores. So more on that to come, but we've already had massive success. Games like aquapark.io are played by millions of users on Snapchat already, And that's just one example among many. With that said, I think Stuart, if you want to kick off the Q&A, be happy.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That was really informative. I'm going to dive in with a question for you with my my chair of Yuki hat on, which is the trade body for the UK games industry. I looked at that list of the biggest hyper-casual publishers, and none of them were British. Are you working with a good proportion of UK developers, or is this a space that is dominated, much more by other territories, other countries?
So you're saying are the UK developers covered more by other publishers?
Yeah, well, no. This space, hyper casual. Obviously, you did a list of the biggest publishers, and none of them were British. But the publishers are working with countless developers. Okay.
Yeah.
So is the UK contributing well? Is it a good proportion of hyper casual, or is it a sector that is dominated by developers from other countries? If you see what I mean.
Yeah, well, I mean, it all depends. Are you looking at? So I think you're mentioning the publisher list that I mentioned at the beginning, right? So on a publisher basis, yes, you don't have too many. I think Quali, maybe a couple of others, and they're happy with a smaller market share. But so the short answer is no. I mean, in terms of publishing, it's not a big geography. But if you're looking at the studios, then yes, there are some fantastic studios based in the UK. I personally worked. Back when I was doing games directly, I worked with Neon Play, worked with Full Fat, worked with Tapped, and all these guys. They made some major hits. Frankly, I mean, you had Roller Splat, which got hundreds of millions of users. I think you had just a bunch of games, Flip Dunk and Scribble Rider last summer from Tapped, and these are all UK-based studios. So the answer is yes. The UK is a big geo for studios. For publishers, less so.
And what is it that draws you to when you decide to start working with a studio? Do you make them work with you exclusively for a number of titles? Is it a single title deal? Do you invest in them and fund the title?
Yeah, so we really do. I think one of the big parts of how we invest in studios and what they value the most is we will invest our time, to be honest, from day one. So a studio does not need to have traction. They just need to show potential. Potential usually is demonstrated by a couple games you built, and I don't care whether you've built 2 games, and you started 6 months or 2 months ago, or whether you built 20. It doesn't matter. What matters is what is your ideation process? What is your approach? What is the coachability of your studio, your game leads? What are the types of execution skills that you have? You can tell that very quickly from a prototype or two. And so studios like that really value the fact that they've suddenly have on the other end of the line once a week, once every 2 weeks, a publishing manager that has done, generated millions and millions of downloads with other studios, a publishing manager that has advice on what's the next step, how do you grow, what's my roadmap on this next project. But also free testing, a free platform, a knowledge base, weekly live streams. We really cover our studios with a lot of insights, and they value that much more at the end of the day than any retainer fee or minimum capital, because you can grow much faster with a quick success than with the rest of it.
And in terms of the games that you're signing, you talked about the successes you had in the past 12 months or so, and you said that the games have been a bit deeper.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you are looking for deeper games and you're moving a little bit away from hyper casual, or does it mean that the hyper casual sector is evolving?
It's a good question. I mean, off the bat, it's the second, whereby you still have a bit of everything, frankly, and you don't want all of your pipeline to go into one single insight. But what we have seen is that games that tend to demonstrate strong retentive features or core gameplays and repeatable mechanics, games that are forgiving, rewarding, and so forth. Those are old basic rules of hyper-casual that we really emphasized back in 2018. They still hold true, maybe more so than even then. And we feel that this is definitely a hyper-casual phenomenon rather than a voodoo phenomenon. And we think that a portion of games can benefit from them, from this insight. You'll still have some traditional runners that bring in users, churn them out. And we're not saying you need to build some complex meta and very long tail LTV features, even though we do have some teams that deploy them in your games. But that you need to look for that really satisfying repetitive core, just as you did 3 years ago.
And obviously, with the huge growth in the mobile market as a proportion of the global games market, and hyper casual being clearly a fantastic space, is it kind of over for? There used to be a casual game space in console and PC. Do you think mobile has basically destroyed that forever? I know there was Nintendo had a fantastic year on Switch, but it doesn't seem to be that casual gaming drives any kind of growth on Steam or PlayStation or Xbox.
And that therefore, sorry?
Well, basically, mobile has wiped that out as a genre for some of the other games formats, because mobile is the go-to place for hyper casual or tablet or whatever.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's true. And I think that hyper casual on mobile is growing, still growing tremendously. And that what you're seeing also is pockets of new areas, maybe not on Twitch and on other non-mobile platforms, but you are seeing HTML games, social games. And what I was mentioning about reach extension is that the great opportunity for hyper casual studios is that we can take their games, port them ourselves if we need to, get the technical capacities, because we're almost a 400-person company now. We can click our fingers, it's done, it's up, and it can go on different Android stores in China. It can go on Snap. It can go on plenty of different platforms, and that's the beauty of mobile.
Just one last question before we move on. Do you think there's anything in a post-pandemic world that will become a trend in hyper casual? Do you think the market will reduce because consumers want to go and do other things than play games whilst they're indoors? Do you think it will affect what they expect from a game?
That's a great question. It comes back to, actually, it's because it ties into this high engagement type of games working out, because some of them, like Lumbercraft or City Takeover or even Bounce and Collect, those 2021 titles that we found were very retentive, that was on the slide. They are games that don't necessarily require you to be on a commute, or they're less snackable intrinsically, and maybe that is a side effect of COVID. And maybe you will be seeing a 2022 that is going back towards what 2019 or 2020 looked like in terms of the proportion of games that are successful in each segment, and maybe more snackable, low CPI games again. What I would say is that COVID didn't have a tremendous impact, what we found, on our segment, positive or negative. And so it doesn't really change the game in terms of hyper casual studios. Okay.
Thank you, Alexander. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. We had a lot of people watching there. Very, very valuable. Good luck with the road to the next 5 billion downloads.
Absolutely, and they'll come much faster. Trust me, the curve is like this. And thanks very much for having me, Stuart. Really appreciate it. Always fun to be on with you guys.
Excellent. Thanks very much. See you next time. Bye bye.